Good day, everybody. I'm showing you an old school Montreal Expos helmet. Obviously, that's a toy batting helmet, and this is a starting lineup figurine of Vladimir Guerrero Sr., who began his career with the Expos. And I was thinking about the 2003 Montreal Expos, been thinking about them recently. That stuff comes to my mind at certain times, just happens. But by 2003, the Expos had a playoff drought that had gone back to 1981. A longer drought than the Seattle Mariners had last year that had gone back to 2001, a drought the Mariners, as we know, broke in 2022. But by 2003, the Expos had a lot going against them. They were run by Major League Baseball, which wasn't putting a ton of money into the team. They were not drawing very many fans in Montreal. It was common for them to only have 3,000 or 4,000 fans, sometimes even less than that for home games. And in part because of that, Major League Baseball had the Expos play about 25% of their home games clear out in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And though they did draw their fair share of fans there, made the travel, which is already difficult for major leaguers, that much tougher. Montreal to San Juan and everywhere else on the road, hard to do. And yet, despite these challenges, the Expos gave the much more talented Atlanta Braves a run for their money in the NL East, at least early in the season. By June, Atlanta, which still had future Hall of Famers Greg Maddux, Chipper Jones, John Smoltz, began to assert itself. Braves began to assert themselves and ran away with the NL East, but the Expos remained competitive and were very much in the hunt for what was back then the one and only wild card spot in the National League. And in late June, Major League Baseball actually did pull a deal for the Expos. The Expos had a trade in place for an aging but still productive Juan Gonzalez from the last place Texas Rangers. But Gonzalez, who once asked the Detroit Tigers to move in the fences so he could hit more home runs and have better stats, showed he still only cared about himself by turning down the trade. He had a no-trade clause in his contract, so he had a right to do it. It was just hard to accept. And yet, despite that fact, the Expos still remained competitive. And in late August, we're actually tied with 4 other teams for that one wild card spot in the National League. It would have been awesome, to me at least, if the Expos had made the playoffs in 2003, and while I was rooting hard for the Cubs, as I always do, I was rooting for the Expos as well. All they'd been through, and yet to continue fighting the way they did would have been so cool if they'd made the playoffs, but wasn't meant to be. The Expos did finish with a winning record of 83-79, but the playoffs were not in the cards. And part of that, in addition to the travel schedule and the low payroll that I've talked about, speak of low payroll, at that time in September, major league teams were allowed to expand their rosters from 25 players to 40. The Expos didn't do that. Major League Baseball decided it was too much. They couldn't afford to do that. So the Expos just stuck with what they had, and wasn't quite enough. A valiant effort, but wasn't quite enough. And I've wondered, had the Expos made the playoffs in 03, could they have gotten new owners to keep them in Montreal? I mean, what would have changed? Of course, something that already changed the fortune of the franchise, 1994, when the Expos had the best record in the majors, but then a player's strike stopped the season. No World Series, no playoffs, no nothing for the Expos. So they lost that because agreed to players and owners. And I think part of why they missed the playoffs in 03 was because of greed of the owners. And it was pretty clear that the Expos weren't going to be in Montreal much longer, and they weren't going to be competitive much longer. The guy I'm showing you here, Vladimir Guerrero, became a free agent after the 03 season and signed with the Angels, further solidified his Hall of Fame career. Fine shortstop Orlando Cabrera was sent to the Red Sox in 04, where he won a World Series. And by the end of the 04 season, it was announced the Expos would indeed be moving out of Montreal to Washington, D.C., where we know them today as the Washington Nationals. So that's my thought for the day, and there may be an expansion team coming to Montreal sometime. One never knows. This commissioner, who's clearly all about the money, certainly talked about expansion in the past. Could it happen in Montreal? Who knows? But the Expos certainly had some good times and some bad times in that 2003 season, though they came up short. Certainly one I'll never forget. It's my story for the day. Thank you for watching and listening. Talk to you later this month with more videos and commentaries. Good day, everybody.